How do you measure the life of a man who helped build a global dynasty, survived the storms that shattered it, buried the people he loved most, and somehow still found the strength to stand? This is not the story the world thinks it knows. This is the truth behind Jermaine Jackson, the child shaped by silence, the brother torn by loyalty, the father humbled by mistakes, and the survivor now searching for peace in the quiet years of his life. If you grew up with the Jacksons, if Michael's voice still touches your heart, and if you have ever wondered what happens to the man who carried both the harmony and the heartbreak of America's most famous family, this journey will stay with you long after the final word. Jermaine Jackson was born into a life that gave him very little comfort and almost no space to dream. He grew up in Gary, Indiana, inside a very small two-bedroom house that held 11 people. The house was crowded, noisy, and always felt full, not because of joy, but because of how many lives were squeezed together. His father, Joseph, worked long days at a steel mill. He often came home tired, covered in dust, carrying the heavy pressure of trying to feed so many children with a low income. His mother, Catherine, also worked when she could, mostly part-time jobs, but she spent most of her energy keeping the home stable. She tried to give the children kindness and faith, even when life felt overwhelming. Money was always tight. The family had to make everything stretch. Clothes were passed down from one child to the next. Food was simple and sometimes not enough. The house was so small that the children slept in different directions on the same bed, lying head to toe just to fit. Even in such difficult conditions, the family tried to stay together, but the pressure of daily survival created tension in the home. Jermaine's childhood was shaped mostly by two forces: Joseph's strict discipline and Catherine's deep religious beliefs. Joseph believed strongly that hard work and discipline were the only way his children could escape poverty. He expected obedience, respect, and results. He wanted his children to succeed, but his methods were often harsh. Mistakes were not taken lightly, and the children grew up afraid of disappointing him. They learned early that raising their voice, talking back, or relaxing too much could bring punishment. Catherine, on the other hand, tried to guide her children with gentleness and faith. She taught them about Jehovah's Witness beliefs, encouraged them to pray, and tried to balance Joseph's strictness with emotional warmth. But even with her kindness, the household still carried a heavy atmosphere. One of the earliest tragedies the family experienced was the death of Marlon's twin brother, Brandon, shortly after birth. Even though Jermaine was not born yet, the sadness from that loss stayed in the family for years. Catherine never forgot the baby she lost, and Joseph carried the grief in silence. This created an emotional shadow inside the home. The children felt it, even if they didn't fully understand it. Love existed, but it was often quiet and limited by stress, fear, and responsibilities. Growing up in this environment left a clear emotional mark on Jermaine. He became a quiet, observant child who learned early to keep his feelings inside. He did not argue or cause trouble. Instead, he tried to follow the rules and avoid conflict. He admired his mother's calmness and tried to copy her gentle nature. He also respected his father's strength, even if he feared him. This mix of fear, respect, and obedience taught Jermaine to be careful with his words and actions. He learned to read the mood in the house and adjust himself to avoid more tension. But despite the pressure around him, Jermaine developed a natural sensitivity that helped him connect to music. He often sat quietly, listening to sounds around the house: his father's guitar, his mother humming, his brothers tapping rhythms on the table. Music became a private escape, something that made sense when the rest of the world felt confusing. He didn't talk much, but he listened deeply, and that listening helped shape his musical instincts. The turning point in the family's life happened because of a simple accident. One day, Tito, one of the older brothers, took Joseph's guitar without permission. While trying to play it, he broke a string. When Joseph found out, he was angry at first, But when he told Tito to play something again, he realized his son had real talent. That moment changed everything. Joseph suddenly saw a possibility for his children to escape poverty through music. From that day, Jermaine's childhood took a new direction. The brothers started practicing as a group, and the early version of what became the Jackson 5 began to form. Jermaine was assigned the bass guitar and vocals. Even though he was young, he learned quickly. He practiced for hours, his fingers hurting as he tried to master the notes. He also started singing with his brothers, learning how to stay in harmony and how to support the lead vocals. Jermaine became known for his warm, steady voice, which added balance to the group. Rehearsals soon became part of daily life. Joseph pushed the children hard. They practiced in the small living room, moving furniture aside to make space. There was very little room to move, and sometimes the walls felt too close, but they kept going. Joseph believed perfection was the only path forward. If someone sang the wrong note or missed a dance step, they had to start all over again. There was no time for play or rest. Music became their main focus, and Jermaine learned early that success required discipline. The house was still crowded and noisy, but now the noise came from rehearsals, not just from daily life. The children felt both excitement and pressure. They could sense that their father was determined to push them toward something bigger. Jermaine, even at a young age, understood that his role mattered. He wasn't just another child anymore. He was part of a dream that could lift the whole family. But even with the spark of talent and opportunity, Jermaine still felt the loneliness of a child who carried too much responsibility too soon. There were moments when he wanted a normal childhood time to play, laugh, or simply rest. But the demands of the group left little room for that. He rarely complained, though. He accepted the role placed on him, trying his best to make his father proud and support his brothers. Jermaine's early life was a mix of struggle and possibility. The poverty, the strict rules, the heavy expectations, and the small victories through music all shaped him into the person he was becoming. His childhood taught him discipline, patience, and emotional strength. But it also taught him how quickly childhood can disappear when responsibility arrives too early. But destiny, once awakened, never asks if a child is ready. And Jermaine was about to be pushed into a world no boy should enter unprepared. Jermaine's life changed almost overnight when the Jackson 5 signed with Motown Records in 1969. The family moved from Gary, Indiana, to California, and the small, crowded house they had known for so long was replaced with a new environment that felt bigger but also unfamiliar. For Jermaine, who was only 14 years old, everything suddenly moved fast. There was no slow adjustment, no time to understand the new world they had entered. Motown was a serious, professional music company, and from the first day, Jermaine realized that the expectations were high and the pace would be demanding. At Motown, Jermaine was given one of the most important roles in the group. He became the co-lead singer, sharing many songs with his younger brother Michael. Jermaine's deeper voice balanced Michael's high energy and bright tone. Together, they created a sound that became the key identity of the Jackson 5. Jermaine took this responsibility very seriously. He knew millions of people would eventually hear his voice, and he wanted to do it right. He spent hours practicing, understanding harmonies, and learning how to control his voice. He felt proud, but also nervous, because this opportunity came with a lot of pressure. The Jackson 5's schedule quickly became intense. Their first tours took them across the country, and Jermaine had to learn how to perform in front of huge crowds, even though he was still a teenager. He experienced exhaustion for the first time. There were early mornings, long rehearsals, late-night shows, interviews, and constant travel. At an age when most kids were attending school dances or playing with friends, Jermaine was sitting in airplanes, dressing rooms, or hotel rooms, preparing for performances. He tried to stay calm, but the schedule was difficult for someone so young. The pace became even more demanding as the Jackson 5 grew more successful. At one point, They were performing around 300 shows a year. This meant almost every day was spent on the road or on stage. Jermaine learned to sleep on buses, eat whenever he had a few minutes, and function even when he was extremely tired. His voice needed to stay strong, so he had to be careful with talking, shouting, or doing anything that would damage his vocal cords. This lifestyle took a physical and emotional toll on him. He didn't complain, but it was clear that fame required sacrifices. The hard work, however, paid off. The Jackson 5 achieved something rare in music history. Their first 4 singles, I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There, all reached #1 on the Billboard charts. This level of success made them national stars in a very short time. When Jermaine stood on stage and heard thousands of people cheering, he felt both excitement and disbelief. He had grown up in poverty, and now he was experiencing something that didn't even seem real. But behind the applause, there were complicated feelings that Jermaine didn't always know how to express. As the group got more attention, Michael started to become the main focus of the public. People were naturally drawn to his talent, charm, and energy. Jermaine loved Michael deeply and was proud of his younger brother's success. He often told others how talented Michael was and how special his voice sounded. But at the same time, Jermaine sometimes felt a quiet ache. He had worked just as hard, yet he noticed that fans and producers were paying more attention to Michael. This was not because of jealousy in a harmful way, but because Jermaine struggled with his own identity. He wondered where he fit in the group and whether people saw his value. Still, Jermaine did not let these feelings break the bond he shared with Michael. Instead, he tried to support him. Jermaine acted as the emotional anchor of the group, especially for his younger brothers. While Michael delivered the high-energy performances, Jermaine kept the harmonies steady and helped maintain the structure of the group's sound. He made sure the others stayed focused, practiced regularly, and handled the pressure as best as they could. Even when he felt tired or overwhelmed, he tried to stay strong for his family. But with fame came loneliness. Even surrounded by thousands of fans, hotel staff, reporters, and team members, Jermaine often found himself feeling isolated. He missed normal teenage experiences. He missed having quiet time. Sometimes, he looked out the window of a tour bus and wondered what his life would have been like if he had stayed in school and lived like a regular teenager. But he also understood that he had been given an opportunity that very few people in the world ever received. This mixed feeling stayed with him for many years. The more the Jackson 5 succeeded, the more Jermaine realized that he was living in 2 worlds. On stage, he was a star, someone admired and cheered for. Off stage, he was still a young boy trying to understand himself, manage pressure, and deal with emotions he did not always know how to express. He did not want to disappoint his father, his mother, his brothers, or the fans. This internal pressure made him mature faster than most people his age. Jermaine's conflict about being overshadowed by Michael never changed his love for him. He felt proud of Michael, but also felt unsure of himself. He wondered if he would ever be recognized for his own talent, or if he would always be seen only as part of the group. This was an emotional struggle that would follow him into adulthood and affect many decisions he later made. Despite the challenges, Jermaine kept working hard. He accepted that fame came with both rewards and sacrifices. He understood that being part of such a successful group required effort, discipline, and emotional strength. Even when he felt tired or confused, he stayed committed to the group's goals. His dedication helped the Jackson 5 maintain their powerful presence during their early years at Motown. But the spotlight that crowned Michael would soon split the family in 2, and Jermaine would be forced to choose what part of himself he was willing to sacrifice. In 1975, Jermaine Jackson faced one of the hardest moments of his life. The Jackson 5 had been with Motown for years, and the label had shaped their sound, their style, and their careers. But by this time, the group felt they had reached a limit. They wanted more control over their music, better contracts, and the freedom to write and produce their own songs. Motown did not agree to these changes, and the brothers decided it was time to leave the label and sign with Epic Records. This decision put Jermaine in a very difficult place. On one side, he had his brothers, the people he grew up with, shared stages with, and loved deeply. On the other side, he had Motown, the company that had given them their first big chance, and he had his marriage to Hazel Gordy, the daughter of Berry Gordy, Motown's founder. This was not just a business choice for Jermaine. It was a choice between family and marriage, between the life he knew as a Jackson and the life he had built through Motown. Jermaine spent many nights thinking about what to do. He could not sleep properly, and the stress was heavy on him. He was stuck in the middle, knowing that no matter what he chose, someone important to him would be hurt. He loved his brothers deeply. They had been together since they were children, working, practicing, and performing. But he also loved Hazel and respected her family. Berry Gordy had treated him kindly and had played a major role in his success. Jermaine felt loyalty toward him and believed he owed him something for the opportunities he had been given. The situation became more painful as the day to make a decision approached. The other Jackson brothers were preparing to leave Motown, and they wanted Jermaine to join them. They hoped he would choose family. They had always been together, and losing one brother felt heartbreaking. Jermaine understood their feelings, but he also saw the pressure on Hazel and her family. His heart felt divided, and he knew there was no choice that could fix everything. In the end, Jermaine chose to stay with Motown. It was a decision that shocked the public and hurt the family. When the brothers moved forward as the Jacksons, Jermaine was not part of the group. The separation created a visible fracture, not just in business, but in their emotional bond. Although they still loved each other, this moment left a mark that would take years to heal. Jermaine later admitted that this was one of the hardest decisions of his life, and that he felt the pain of it for a long time. After the split, Jermaine focused on his solo career. Motown supported him, and he began releasing his own albums. At first, the public was unsure how he would perform without his brothers, but Jermaine slowly started to build his own identity. His biggest breakthrough came in 1980 with the album Let's Get Serious, which included production help from Stevie Wonder. The title track became one of his most successful songs, reaching high positions on the charts. The album sold well, and for the first time, Jermaine felt what it was like to be recognized for his own voice and talent separate from the Jackson 5. It was a proud moment for him because he had worked for many years without being fully seen. During this time, Jermaine enjoyed finally standing in his own spotlight. He felt he had proven to himself and to others that he could succeed independently. But this feeling did not last long. Only a couple of years later, Michael released Thriller in 1982. The album became the biggest-selling record in music history and turned Michael into a global icon. The success was massive, beyond anything the Jackson family had experienced before. Jermaine was proud of his younger brother and celebrated his achievements. But deep inside, he once again felt overshadowed. He found himself in a familiar emotional place, where he supported Michael but also struggled with his own sense of worth. Everywhere he went, people asked about Michael, not about him. Interviewers focused on Thriller, not on Let's Get Serious. It felt to him as if the world had room for only one star from the family, and that star was Michael. Jermaine started questioning his own identity again. He wondered who he was outside the Jackson name. He struggled with thoughts like, do people see me for who I am, or only as part of the group? And will I ever be recognized on my own? These thoughts created an internal crisis that made him feel smaller, even as he continued performing and releasing music. He did not want to feel jealous, and he wasn't angry at Michael, but he could not stop himself from feeling the difference in how they were celebrated. Through all of this, the family slowly rebuilt their connection. Jermaine eventually rejoined his brothers for some reunions and performances, showing that the love between them never truly disappeared. But the emotional scars from the 1975 split and the constant comparisons to Michael stayed with Jermaine. They influenced how he saw himself, how he made decisions, and how he reacted to pressure. Jermaine's journey during these years was a mix of personal victory and emotional struggle. He found success on his own, but he also faced the pain of living in the shadow of someone he loved. His loyalty pulled him in different directions, and his identity felt unclear at times. He wanted to be a good brother, a good husband, and a respected artist, but balancing all these roles was harder than most people knew. But identity wasn't Jermaine's only battle, because even as the world celebrated him, his heart was beginning a quiet collapse at home. Jermaine's love story with Hazel Gordy began during a time when he was young, hopeful, and still learning how to balance fame with real life. Hazel was kind, gentle, and came from a respected family in the music world. As the daughter of Berry Gordy, she understood the pressures of the industry, but she also valued peace, family, and loyalty. When Jermaine and Hazel started their relationship, it felt natural and easy. They were both young, and their connection came from honest feelings, not from fame or pressure. Their wedding in 1973 symbolized a fresh start for Jermaine. He believed he could have a stable home life, while also being part of a famous group. When they welcomed their first child, Jermaine felt something he had never experienced before. Becoming a father made him emotional and proud. It gave him a feeling of responsibility and joy that no stage performance could replace. When their second child arrived, their home felt full of life. And for a while, Jermaine believed he had everything he had dreamed of: a growing family, a loving wife, and a successful career. But as time went on, the demands of his music career became heavier. Touring, rehearsing, recording, and traveling left him exhausted. He had very little time to rest, and even less time to give to Hazel and the children. He felt torn between his responsibilities as an artist and as a husband and father. The distance between Jermaine and Hazel did not appear suddenly. It grew slowly, almost silently. Jermaine would come home tired, sometimes emotionally drained, and Hazel would wait for him with patience, hoping he would have time to talk or spend time with the children. But many nights, he simply didn't have the energy. He still loved Hazel, but he struggled to balance his time and emotions. Hazel, in her quiet way, tried to keep the home peaceful, but she also felt the growing gap between them. She didn't express anger, but her sadness was clear in her silence. Jermaine began to feel lonely even inside his own marriage. He didn't always express his feelings, and this made it harder for Hazel to understand what he was going through. As the emotional space widened, Jermaine found himself vulnerable. During this period of emotional weakness, he developed a relationship with another woman, Margaret Maldonado. This was not a decision made in a moment. It was a slow step into something that he knew deep down was wrong. But the emotional confusion and exhaustion made him look for comfort in a place where he felt understood. When Jermaine became involved with Margaret, his life became split in two. He now had two households, two women, and soon, two sets of children depending on him. Margaret gave birth to his son Jeremy in 1986, and later to his son Jordan in 1989. Every time Jermaine held his new children, he felt love and responsibility. But he also felt guilt. He knew that his actions were hurting Hazel, and he knew that he was breaking the trust of the woman who had believed in him from the beginning. The emotional weight of living two lives affected Jermaine deeply. He tried to support both families, but the stress was heavy. He felt guilt toward Hazel for his betrayal. He felt guilt toward Margaret because their relationship was built on a painful foundation. He felt guilt toward the children, knowing that their lives would be shaped by a complicated situation they did not create. Jermaine often tried to fix things, but every attempt seemed to create more emotional strain. Hazel carried her heartbreak quietly. She did not create scenes or seek revenge. She simply pulled back slowly, protecting her children and trying to understand what had happened to the marriage she once believed would last. Her calmness made the end even more painful. There were no loud arguments or dramatic moments. The marriage simply reached a point where both of them knew it was over. When they officially divorced in 1988, it was a sad but expected ending. Hazel walked away with dignity, and Jermaine carried the weight of knowing he had caused her pain. Margaret also experienced her own struggles. She loved Jermaine, but she knew that part of his heart was still with his first family. She often felt unsure of her place in his life. She had his children, she cared for him, but she also lived with the constant awareness that their relationship had started under difficult circumstances. She tried to create stability for her sons, but it was hard for her not to feel the emotional tension around them. Jermaine entered the 1,990 seconds, carrying emotional exhaustion from the years behind him. He had children in different homes, financial responsibilities that continued to grow, and the guilt of decisions he could never take back. He tried to move forward, but the past did not leave him easily. The mistakes, the broken trust, and the heavy emotions followed him into the next chapter of his life. He cared deeply for all his children, but he struggled with how to give each of them the attention and stability they needed. Jermaine often looked back on those years with a mixture of regret and understanding. He knew he had made choices that caused pain, but he also knew that he had been overwhelmed and emotionally lost at the time. He realized that fame and pressure had influenced many of his decisions, but he also accepted responsibility for them. The emotional fallout from his marriage to Hazel and his relationship with Margaret taught him how complicated love can become when life moves too fast and communication breaks down. But even heartbreak wasn't the end, because another relationship was waiting, one that would ignite the most controversial chapter of his life. Jermaine's next chapter began at a time when he was already emotionally tired and trying to make sense of his complicated family life. When he became involved with Alejandra Oaziaza, it immediately became a story people judged without hesitation. The situation was sensitive because Alejandra had previously been in a relationship with his younger brother Randy and had children with him. Their connection was already linked to the Jackson family, and when Jermaine and Alejandra became a couple, the public reacted strongly. Many people did not understand how something like this could happen, and the media quickly turned it into a scandal. For Jermaine, it was another heavy emotional moment he had to deal with, on top of everything he was already carrying. Jermaine and Alejandra tried to move forward despite the outside noise. But the pressure from the public was constant. They faced criticism, jokes, and harsh comments from reporters and magazines. The spotlight felt cruel, and it added stress to a relationship that was already starting under difficult circumstances. Even inside the family, the situation created tension. There were children involved who had to be protected from the headlines and the reactions of strangers. Jermaine knew this, and he felt the weight of trying to create peace in a situation that was complicated from the beginning. Their household soon grew as they welcomed two more sons, Jafar in 1996 and Jermajesty in 2000. Jermaine loved all of his children deeply, and becoming a father again gave him moments of joy and purpose. But with every new child, his responsibilities increased. He now had 7 children across 3 different relationships. Each child needed support, time, stability, and attention. Jermaine tried to be present, but the reality was challenging. His music career was not as active as before, and the financial demands kept rising. The financial pressure became one of the biggest struggles of this period in Jermaine's life. Child support payments for several children, along with living costs, legal fees, and basic expenses, created a heavy burden. The money coming in was not enough to match what was going out. There were times when his reported income was surprisingly low, around $1,100 a month, during certain periods far below what people imagined a former star would be earning. But this was the reality Jermaine faced. Royalty checks were inconsistent, performances were limited, and the cost of raising a large family was growing. The situation reached a point where Jermaine began facing legal trouble over unpaid child support. News outlets reported overdue payments, and the courts issued warnings. One of the biggest threats he faced was having his driver's license suspended if he did not pay the amounts owed. These moments were humiliating for Jermaine. The same man who had once been on magazine covers and performed in sold-out arenas was now dealing with court documents, financial breakdowns, and public embarrassment. People who didn't know the full situation judged him harshly, assuming he didn't care. But the truth was that Jermaine cared deeply. He just didn't have the financial resources to meet all of the obligations at once. Inside the home, the stress affected his relationship with Alejandra. They both tried to make things work for their sons, but the pressure around them made daily life extremely difficult. Their blended family included children from different relationships, and managing everyone's needs required emotional strength that both Jermaine and Alejandra struggled to maintain. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, and long periods of silence. The children, though loved, were growing up in a complex environment that was hard for any household to manage. Jermaine often felt torn. He wanted to provide stability for his sons with Alejandra, but he also needed to support his children from previous relationships. He felt guilty toward all of them because he knew that no matter how much he tried, someone would always feel his absence or notice the financial struggle. The emotional pressure built up day by day. Jermaine carried shame from the headlines, frustration from the court cases, and stress from trying to keep up with responsibilities that kept piling on. For Alejandra, the difficulties were also overwhelming. She was raising two young boys while dealing with constant public attention and criticism. She wanted to protect her children from the negativity, but it wasn't easy. She also felt the weight of depending on Jermaine financially during a time when his income was unstable. Her frustration and sadness mixed with Jermaine's exhaustion, and slowly, the relationship started to weaken. They tried to stay together, but the emotional cracks grew wider. By 2008, the marriage had reached its end. Their divorce was not a loud or dramatic fight. It was the result of years of pressure, misunderstanding, financial issues, and emotional exhaustion. Both Jermaine and Alejandra were worn out. They still cared for their children, but they knew they could not continue as a couple. When the divorce became official, Jermaine walked away with another heavy chapter added to his life. He once again carried guilt, stress, and the responsibility of raising children across different homes. This period left Jermaine emotionally drained. He had tried to build a stable family, but the combination of scandal, public pressure, financial collapse, and personal mistakes made it nearly impossible. He loved his children, but he struggled with how to divide his time, attention, and resources. He felt misunderstood by the public and judged harshly at a time when he needed support the most. Even though this chapter ended painfully, Jermaine kept moving forward. He continued trying to support his children and rebuild his life, even when it felt overwhelming. He learned that carrying the weight of past decisions can last for years, and he realized that healing takes time. But the world's judgment was nothing compared to the storm waiting for him, the loss that would tear his soul in two. Jermaine's life changed forever on the 25th of June, 2009. When he first heard that something was wrong with Michael, he did not want to believe it. For him, Michael was not just a global icon. He was the little brother who slept in the same room with him as a child, the boy he practiced music with, and the person who shared the same difficult childhood. When the news finally became clear that Michael had died, Jermaine felt something inside him collapse. It was not only grief, it was shock, regret, and a deep pain that he could not explain. Losing Michael meant losing a part of his past, his family, and himself. No matter how famous Michael had become, to Jermaine, he was still the younger brother he loved. Jermaine often said that the hardest part was not the world losing the king of pop, but him losing the person he grew up with. The two had experienced things together that no one else understood. They lived through the strict rules of their father, the pressure of fame, the early rehearsals, the long bus rides, and the changes that came with success. Even when they had disagreements as adults, the bond from childhood never disappeared. After Michael's death, Jermaine felt the weight of all the moments they never talked about. He thought about things left unsaid, apologies, conversations, and simple words of love that he always believed he would have time to say later. Now he understood that time had run out. When the funeral was held, the world watched with heavy hearts. Michael's daughter Paris spoke through tears and told everyone how much she loved her father. Her words broke the silence in the stadium and left millions emotional. While the crowd mourned, Jermaine stood with a different kind of pain. He had to balance private grief with a public duty. He was the one who announced Michael's passing to the world, and doing that felt almost impossible. His voice shook, his hands were unsteady, and inside he felt empty. But he had to do it, because he believed it was one last act of respect for his brother. After the funeral, the world continued to talk about Michael's legacy, but Jermaine lived in quiet suffering. He kept replaying memories of their childhood, their early days as the Jackson Five, and the moments when they leaned on each other. Sometimes he found himself talking to Michael in his thoughts, saying the things he wished he had said years ago. The grief stayed with him in a deep way, and he knew it would never fully go away. Just when Jermaine began to adjust to the loss of Michael, another heartbreak arrived. In 2012, Whitney Houston passed away. Whitney was not family by blood, but she was someone Jermaine cared for and respected. They had known each other since the 1,980 seconds, and Jermaine always admired her talent and her kind personality. He understood the pressure she lived with, and he knew how fame could sometimes affect a person's emotional health. Losing Whitney felt different from losing Michael, but it still hurt deeply. It was another reminder of how fragile life can be, especially for people who grow up in the entertainment world. Whitney's death made Jermaine think even more about the challenges that artists face, the pressure to be perfect, the expectations of the public, and the private battles that people never see. Jermaine felt sadness not only for the loss itself, but also because he knew the struggles Whitney had faced. For him, it was another wound in a life already filled with emotional hits. Then came the loss of his father, Joe Jackson, in 2018. This was another complicated moment for Jermaine. Joe had played a major role in the family's success. He pushed his children hard because he believed it was the only way to lift them out of poverty. But his methods were strict and sometimes very painful. The relationship between Joe and his children was complex. When Joe died, Jermaine felt sorrow because he was losing a father, but he also felt the weight of unresolved feelings. Grieving Joe was not simple. Jermaine had to face memories of discipline, pressure, fear, but also memories of achievements and opportunities Joe created for them. It was a mix of emotions that took time to process. After Joe's death, Jermaine tried to stay strong for the rest of the family. But in 2024, another loss struck him hard. His older brother Tito passed away. Tito had always been the quiet, steady presence in the family. He did not seek attention, but his calm personality helped balance the family during difficult times. Losing Tito felt like losing another piece of the original Jackson family. More than that, it made Jermaine face the reality that the circle of siblings was shrinking. The people he had grown up with were slowly leaving, and that created a deep loneliness. With each loss, Michael, Whitney, Joe, Tito, Jermaine felt the world around him growing quieter. The memories of his early life, the shared experiences, and the bond he had with his siblings started to feel distant. He realized how painful it is to outlive the people who shaped you. The house that once had so much noise, laughter, and movement was now replaced by silence. Jermaine found himself thinking more about aging, loss, and the meaning of family. Even though Jermaine had survived many personal struggles, these losses affected him in a way nothing else ever had. They reminded him that fame does not protect anyone from grief. The world saw Michael as a legend, Whitney as a superstar, Joe as a strict father, and Tito as the quiet guitarist. But for Jermaine, they were people he loved, lived with, argued with, and grew up beside. The sadness of losing them was personal, not public. But grief, even in its darkest form, was not the final chapter, because Jermaine still had to learn who he was. Once the music faded and the world grew quiet, in his 70 seconds, Jermaine Jackson lives a life very different from the one he knew during the height of fame. His days are calm, steady, and shaped by a routine that gives him comfort. He is no longer surrounded by crowds, tours, or cameras. Instead, he wakes up in a modest home where the noise of the world cannot reach him. His income is steady but simple, built mostly from royalties, interviews, documentaries, and occasional appearances. After years of financial stress, court cases, and heavy responsibilities, he has finally reached a place where his bills are manageable and his life is stable. Nothing in his lifestyle today reflects the flashy image many people expect from a former global star. His home is warm, filled with small personal things that remind him of where he came from and what he lived through. Jermaine starts most mornings with prayer. His conversion to Islam in 1989 changed his life in a deep way. The religion gave him discipline, clarity, and emotional grounding. After a childhood shaped by fear, pressure, and strict expectations, Islam became a place where he could breathe. Even today, he begins each day by thanking God for life, family, and peace. This routine keeps him centered. After prayer, he sometimes cooks a simple breakfast, spends time reading, or goes out for a walk if the day feels light. His life is not busy anymore, and he prefers it that way. Inside his home, he keeps old photos, handwritten notes from tours, and souvenirs from the early Jackson 5 days. These memories remind him of both joy and struggle. He also keeps his bass guitars nearby. Sometimes he plays for a few minutes, not to rehearse for a show, but to reconnect with the part of himself that started everything. The sound of the strings brings back memories of rehearsals in Gary, early Motown days, and moments with Michael. Music is no longer his job. It is simply a way to feel connected to the past without being controlled by it. His relationship with his 7 children looks different for each one. Some are closer to him, some have their own lives, and some took time to rebuild trust after the difficult years. Jermaine knows he was not a perfect father. His career demands, emotional struggles, and mistakes made it hard for him to give each child the same attention. But in his 70 seconds, he tries to stay present in ways he could not before. He calls more often, he listens more, he apologizes when needed, and he stays involved in their lives without pushing too hard. Even with different mothers, different histories, and different life paths, there is a sense of care that connects all of them. Jermaine understands now that family is never perfect. It is something you keep trying for, even when you fall short. One of the biggest emotional moments for Jermaine in recent years has been watching his son Jafar step into the role of Michael in the official biopic coming in 2026. Seeing his own child put on the clothes, learn the movements, and study the voice of the brother he lost brings a mix of pride and sadness. It is a full-circle moment that Jermaine never expected. When he looks at Jafar on set, he sees both the legacy of Michael and the future of the family. He feels grateful that the story of the Jacksons will continue through a younger generation, told with respect and accuracy. At the same time, the memories of Michael come back strongly, reminding him of everything they shared and everything he wishes he could say now. Although Jermaine is not active in the music industry the way he once was, he still takes part in projects that honor his family's history. He appears in documentaries, speaks in interviews, and attends events that celebrate the Jackson legacy. But he chooses these appearances carefully. He no longer wants to chase fame. He prefers smaller roles where he can share real experiences rather than be the center of attention. Fame no longer defines him. Peace does. Jermaine also takes part in charity work, especially for children and music education. He understands how important it is to support young people who come from difficult backgrounds. He knows what poverty feels like. He knows how much pressure a child can carry. And he knows how music can change a life. His charity work is quiet and sincere. He does not seek recognition for it. He simply wants to help in ways that feel meaningful. Now, in this chapter of his life, Jermaine often reflects on the past. He thinks about the mistakes he made in his marriages, the emotional stress he faced, the financial battles that pushed him to the edge, and the losses that shaped him. He also thinks about what he learned. He understands now that success can lift you quickly, but can disappear even faster. He understands that relationships need time, patience, and honesty. He understands that parents can shape you in ways you carry forever, both good and bad. And he understands that grief, especially the grief of losing close family, stays with you, but also teaches you to appreciate every day. Jermaine has learned that family is not about perfection. It is about continuing to show up even when things go wrong. It is about trying again after failure. It is about accepting that every person, including yourself, has flaws. What matters is the effort and the intention. This is one of the biggest lessons he carries. After a lifetime of fame, judgment, pressure, and mistakes, he has discovered that real legacy is not written in money or charts. It is written in survival, dignity, and the ability to keep going. He may not live with the luxury people imagine, but he lives with peace. That peace came from faith, reflection, and the understanding that he does not need to prove anything to anyone anymore. His earlier years were filled with noise. Now, he values quiet. He values stability. He values mornings that begin with prayer instead of pressure. And as Jermaine steps into the quietest chapter of his life, one truth remains: what he endured, what he lost, and what he learned still hold a message the world is only beginning to understand.